Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Creative Zone webinar. In this case is Creative Zone Tax and Accounting. That is another entity, or we can call it a sister entity of Creative Zone as a company. As many of you know, that Creative Zone is an entity that specializes in supporting people in setting up their businesses. And our sister business, Creative Zone Tax and Accounting, deals mostly with tax and accounting and compliance related matters. On the call, we have Zeeshan Toor, who is the general manager of Creative Zone Tax and Accounting. We have Hannah Sparrow leading the business development team, who recently joined the team. And we have Mohamed Al Sayed, who is also a tax and accounting advisor, and he's been with the company quite a while, and he's very knowledgeable of anything related to tax and accounting purposes and compliance in the UAE. So today's topic is all about compliance. I think in the last 1 year or so, the UAE has become a little bit stricter, if we can say, or if that could be the right word, in terms of, new regulations that were introduced, AML, anti-money laundering and UBO regulations, ESR, tax was introduced a few years back already. So it's always good, I would say, as a client in your case, to stay connected and to stay informed about the latest when it comes to the regulation and things that you need to keep up with to stay compliant when running a business in the UAE. So maybe Zeeshan, to get started, we can start with you. If you can give us a bit of an introduction on how do you feel were some of these changes before we go into the specifics of ESR, VAT, AML, that I know that each one of you are going to touch a little bit deeper on each of the topics, but maybe a quick view from your side of things, since you are an expert on all of these points. But what would you tell the audience on what were some of the changes into some of these regulations that we were introducing?
Thank you, Lorenzo. First of all, thank you everyone for joining in. Yes, Lorenzo, there have been quite a few changes in the regulations in UAE in the past, 2 or 3 years, with VAT and then ESR and then AML. All of these are very important from a client's perspective. Everyone needs to understand what the regulations are. And even if you don't, you need to still assess whether you fall under the law or not, because these matters do impact you on entity level. And it can have severe effects on, getting penalized, administrative fines and all that. So it's better to always avoid and be up to date, or even, outsource it to someone, to the experts and all that. But it's really important that, moving forward, it's going to be even more, the market is going to get mature from a legal point of view. UAE is going to get better. The regulations are going to improve, and they're going to keep on developing further. So it's better to start now, get yourself assessed, and keep on doing that. Keeping up to date with the regulations is very important from any company's point of view. So to go into an overall thing, AML, UBO is something that everyone needs to understand.
Very good, very good. And we're going to go in depth into all of these points. And as you're rightly saying, Zeeshan, and to the people connecting here today, it's true that a lot of companies have been, given hefty penalties for not, sending the reporting on time, filling in the forms. And in most cases, it's just a matter of filling in the right forms and sending it to the authorities on time. It's just a matter of keeping up, and staying tidy and organized with submitting this information. That's all it is. Hannah, from your side, well, you joined the company recently. What's been sort of your take or your view since you got started in this, and your connection with certain clients that are asking you to learn more information about these topics?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as Zeeshan touched on, these things are still very new to the country. So it's a big learning process for companies out there. So especially if you're new to opening a business in the UAE, this is something very new to you, something that you've never done before. So it's really important to educate yourself and fully understand the implications to your business, and also be compliant with the laws.
Excellent. Mohamed, your 2 cents of an introduction before we get going specifically in each of the points?
I would recommend all the business from the beginning to take their measures. As the last couple of years, it started to get a little bit stricter with the regulations in terms of the compliance. So it's always safe to prepare yourself and do the measures before getting penalized and facing any consequences after. So it's always safe to take your measures, ask experts, have more knowledge about the compliance, because it's always very dangerous to ignore the regulations, because any mistake is attached to fines. So better to be in the safe side from the beginning.
Exactly. Okay, so let's get going with the main points. I think today we're going to be discussing particularly changes to the regulation on ESR. Mohamed, you're going to be talking about VAT and some of the sort of updates on the VAT side of things. Hannah, you're going to be talking a little bit more on AML and what has been sort of introduced over the last year or so on AML regulation and some of the updates and the penalties that we've seen. And Zeeshan, you're going to finish all again with the UBO side of things and a bit of the updates on UBO. So let's start with ESR. Tell us about ESR, economic substance regulation. This was introduced, I understand, back in 2019, but there were some changes applied during 2020. What were some of those changes? What is it that people need to know about ESR? Mostly, what are the activities that this affects, so that when the people looking at this film of the attendees, they say whether this relates to their type of business or not?
Sure, Lorenzo. So ESR was introduced back in 2019, and back then there was initially there was a different procedure of how to file your notifications and all that, and that changed with the regulations when in August 2020 new amendments came into place, and there was an online portal that was later brought live. And we've seen cases where clients are still not aware that there's a new portal up online, and they're still filling out manual forms. So I'm going to go through all of this now to make sure that every client knows what the basics are about ESR. And there's a particular focus this month, mostly because financial year for most companies is December. And I'm going to go deeper into that as well. So just to start with the ESR, the aim for ESR was that when certain businesses who conduct relevant activities, they need to make sure that they have adequate resources while conducting their operations in UAE. That's the main aim. There are entities who had businesses in UAE set up so that they could, take advantage of the tax schemes, tax regimes, lower tax regimes in different places all over the world. So that's why the aim with these regulations was to ensure that companies report actual profits and they have enough economic substance present in UAE, so they would be able to pass this test and do all of that to make sure that they had enough presence within UAE and they are not just evading taxes or taking advantage of the tax regimes in different law regimes. But yeah, that was the case with ESR. And what happens now with ESR, if you do those 9 activities, and just to go through those 9 activities, it's banking, the banking sector comes into play, insurance, investment and management business, lease finance business, headquarters business, shipping business, holding company business, IP, intellectual property, and one of the hot areas, distribution and service center businesses. So these are the 9 relevant activities. If you fall under any of these 9 relevant activities, then you are required to file a notification. First of all, you fall under the law. Then you need to file a notification telling the government that yes, I do conduct one of these or more than one of these activities. And then over the time period, then you need to, if you earn income from that activity, you would need to pass an economic substance test, which basically is proving to the government that you have enough resources within UAE, you have the right staff, you are being directed and managed from within UAE, you have enough expenditure, you have assets within UAE to be actually doing business from within UAE. And it's not a hypothetical kind of a trade license just set up to take advantage of that and still operating in a different part of the world. And, and then you need to be also filing a report which includes all that information with the supporting information and send that as a report to the authorities. So that's the general premise of this law. And why it's a focus in this month is because most businesses in UAE and all over the world, they have their financial year ends in either June or mostly in December. So when you're looking at these regulations, you have 6 months to file a notification, and then you have that 12 months after the financial year end to file a report. So meaning if your financial year end is June 2021, then you would have until December to file a notification. And similarly, if you had a financial year end of December 2020, then you would have until December 21 to file a report which mentions the amount of income, which also supports that income and says that I had this much staff, this much qualified staff, I was directed from UAE, I had presence in UAE, and basically have enough substance within UAE. And that's how you need to approach this particular law. And because of the financial year ending in December, it has that focus right now. And because it's a big report, we recommend clients to get in ahead and do this as soon as possible. You should have those documentations in place and get that done as soon as you can.
And from Creative Zone tax and accounting point of view, where is it that you can help clients with? Is it with the submission of the report, in putting together the report itself, or doing the assessment prior to writing the reports? And the second point will be, you talked about a portal. Where is the portal where clients are supposed to be submitting this at? Okay.
Yeah, so the portal is available on the Ministry of Finance website, and the government has made sure that all the relevant material is also there for people who need to do this themselves or can do this themselves. But from our point of view, where we come in, we can support the clients is throughout the journey. We can come in at ground zero and assess whether you actually do qualify for this law and would fall under this law. And if you do, we would then help you do the initial notification, which tells the authorities that you do actually fall under this law and are conducting a relevant activity. And beyond that, the next step would be, if you earn income from it, we will be able to help you, first of all, recommend anything that would help you pass the economic substance test if you're not already passing it. But if you are, we would be able to help you gather the documents and guide you around what the process is, what documents you would need, and keep on hand so that these could be either submitted now with the economic substance report, or when it's required or when it's gathered. So we would be able to help you at each step of the way throughout the journey regarding this regulation: initial assessment, notification filing, gathering, and helping with comprehensive evaluation, and then filing a report for the whole year.
And could you touch on the specific penalties that people could be getting if they don't file the reports in time? I think the deadline is December the 21st for this period.
Yeah, so anyone who has a financial year end of June 21, they would have a deadline of December 21 for notification filing, and anyone who has a financial year end of December 21 has a deadline of December 20. Sorry, anyone who has a financial year end of December 2020 would have a deadline of December 21 to file the report, which includes the income and the supporting document that you would need to present your case. And yeah, the penalties, they start at 20,000 of not filing a notification or not filing a report, and they can go up to 400,000, and even suspension of license with the activity or cancellations even. And we've seen that happen with clients where some clients may file a wrong report or a wrong notification and then forget to, file the report correctly, and then gotten a penalty and then had to reappeal and fix those things back in. And it's quite a strenuous process, but that's why we try to recommend and to get ahead of things and do this before you have 6 months or 12 months, and you can file those things within this period at any point. You don't have to wait for the last minute to file these things. This is also the last stretch, the last time period before, if you're due right now, this would be the last time. And I always recommend to get this done maybe in the first 3 months or before the last few days.
Ursula is asking a good question. She's asking if does she need to prove that she doesn't fall under any of the 9 areas that fall under ESR? Is there a document that every company needs to fill in explaining that they don't fall under the necessary ESR activities, or the ones that don't apply don't need to?
No, the ones that do not fall under any of these activities, they don't need to do anything. They don't need to say that we don't fall under this. It's always a good approach and a safe approach to say that we don't, but it's not required. The authorities can. That's why it's also recommended to maintain your books as well, and clearly properly maintain books, so that when the authorities come and ask you why you've not filed anything or done this, then you can clearly say, okay, here are our financials, we've not done any activity, and that would be proof enough for them to be able to check whether you've actually done those activities or not. And because this is a more of a substance over form law, so it's very important that you not only just look at the trade license activity, but throughout your year that you've gone through, you need to make sure that you do everything in a way that's maintained properly.
Excellent. So Ursula, in your case, I see you have an online coaching and marketing consultancy business. You don't fall under ESR, so there's no need. There's nothing that is expected for you to do on that. I will remind everybody, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom, or you can put them here on the chat function on the right side of your screen. I'll be trying to read the most relevant questions as they come along. Manuela is also asking, where do I see or I know when is the end of my financial year? Zeeshan?
Yeah, so mostly this will be in your articles of association or memorandum of association. Some of the legal documents already mention this. It depends on which jurisdiction that you're in. And if it's not mentioned in any legal document, either you can pass a board resolution to make sure that you use a financial year that you want it to be. But if there's nothing in place, there's no legal document that says otherwise, then it would come to your renewal, depending on when your trade license is expiring. So that will be your considered as your financial year end.
Very good. A couple of other questions. Well, Julianne is asking that she did an assessment with us last year. Does she need to do assessment again this year? I'm guessing no is the answer to this.
No, because this is a law that needs to be assessed every year. So there could be different situations that would happen each year, right? So, for example, you could offer someone a loan in 1 year and not the other one. So in year one, you could not have anything, not conduct any relevant activity. But in year two, you might give someone out a loan for consideration. So then you would need to file a report, file a notification. So every year you will need to have an assessment done on your operations throughout that year. And then say, okay, I've assessed this, I've gone through my operations, I've not conducted anything during this year regarding any of those relevant activities. So it's an annual thing that you need to do assessment every year.
Very good. Lutz is asking, does e-commerce outside the UAE fall under one of the categories?
So in general point of view, it would not, but it also depends on who you're getting those resources from. So if you're purchasing those materials from a sister concern company or a group company and then shipping it out, it would then fall under this law, or maybe has potential to fall under this law. But it's something that you need to look at a very granular level as well.
Excellent. If we can perhaps to finalize on this topic, if you can mention the 9 activities again, for clarity, there's one gentleman that is asking for this.
Sure. The 9 activities are banking business, insurance business, investment and investment funds management business, lease and finance business, headquarters business, shipping business, holding companies, intellectual property business, and distribution and service center business.
Very good. So if you could perhaps, Zeeshan, put your email on the chat section of the Zoom. Anybody can reach out to Zeeshan if you would like to learn more about ESR regulations. I think we have a whole guide and document that we could perhaps also send to people. And if they want us to further help them with assessing their business and help with this, we will be happy to do. BG is asking, can you elaborate on IP business? Maybe address your questions to Zeeshan separately on an email, and we will help you through those, because I would like to move on to some of the other topics of today, and we don't want to delay for the rest of the session. So Hannah, with you, you're going to be touching more on AML, anti-money laundering. This came into effect, it was implemented back in 2019, 2020 and 2021. It was quite a push for making all of the companies more compliant when it comes to AML. Can you sort of brief the viewers, what is AML? What are the sort of changes and the introductions that have been made over the last couple of years on this topic?
Yeah, definitely. So as you mentioned, the law came into force in 2019, and it's really there to aim to develop and implement a legal structure for the nation. So the UAE wanted to fully implement the standards that were set by the International Financial Action Task Force. So within this, the country is set to achieve certain objectives. So these objectives are combating money laundering practices, as well establishing a framework and practice for concerning authorities. And this is as well to combat anti-money laundering, countering the financial activities of terrorist activities, and as well putting into effect measures against suspicious organizations. So what this has meant is that there are some implications for business within the UAE. And this is not just limited to financial businesses. This also includes designated non-financial businesses and professionals, which we also term as DNFBPs. So within the DNFBPs, this has been designated across 5 broader categories. And so businesses that fall within this, 1 is brokers and real estate agents, 2 is dealers in precious metals and stone, 3 independent auditors and accountants, 4 providers of corporate systems, and lastly, legal consulting firms. So if you fall within these categories, it's really important to register with Go AML. This is a system of the Financial Intelligence Unit. And it's important to note as well that failing to do this with the Ministry of Economy, they have issued stern warnings to say that if you don't register and you fail to do this, you can face fines of up to 50,000 dirhams. And this can expand as well. It can go as high as 1 million and a lot higher as well for other penalties. So just to give more details into the compliance side, it doesn't just mean that you need to register with Go AML. There are other procedures that businesses need to put in place to develop effective risk assessments for their businesses. So one of these includes customer due diligence. This is looking at putting appropriate measures in place so that you identify your customers and ensure that they are the right person and that the reason they're doing their business is for legitimate reasons. Another is transaction monitoring. So this is really understanding why certain transactions are happening, looking at high value thresholds for transactions, and as well looking at SAR, which is suspicious activity reports. So if your business comes across any suspicious activity, it's important for them to report that and submit that to the Financial Intelligence Unit, which is also associated with the Central Bank of the UAE. So more things as well that companies would need to put in place is adequate screening. So looking at screening customers for PEPs, which stands for politically exposed persons. So understanding, again, where funds have come from for these persons of interest, and as well understanding any relatives associated with them and the transactions that they're carrying out as well. And very importantly, appointing a compliance officer. This can also be known as a money laundering reporting officer as well. And they need to have adequate training and expertise so that they can help implement these structures and processes within the business as well. And then along with that, training and developing your teams so that they have adequate anti-money laundering training and making sure that you retain the records up to 5 years as well, so that everything is in line with your registration and also making sure that you're fully compliant within your business.
Excellent. I think there's a very good brief there, Hannah, particularly on understanding what are the type of activities. You're talking about brokers, people dealing with precious metals, corporate service providers, which is the case of even us, Creative Zone. We've had to do some adjustments. And I would say some of the key words there, the issue of having a compliance officer, somebody that is looking into your process on how you onboarding clients. I've seen people investing a bit more in upgrading their processes of their KYCs and understanding, know your client and making sure that you're filling in the proper KYC forms, especially if you fall under any of these activities. It could come to be that, any government authority would like to request further information about any of the activities of your clients. And it's good that you have the backup information, especially showing that you have onboarded these clients on the right manner, that you have the right KYC forms in place. I'm thinking, is it obligatory to companies to do world checks when it comes to, are world checks mandatory for companies aligning to having to comply with their AML regulations?
Yeah, so any company that has to comply with AML needs to put these checks in place, because as you mentioned, at any point, the government can request information. They can ask to look at transactions and certain identification of customers as well. And it's important to know that there are 26 different penalties for not having the right procedures and policy in place. And this, like I said, can range from 50,000 and they can go up to as high as 5 million. As well, within this, it's important to know that you can't just get a penalty for one thing. If you're doing multiple things that are not compliant with the laws, you can have multiple penalties for this as well.
We have one viewer asking, how about management consultancy? Because it was left a little bit open. And I remember a memo at the beginning of the year that talked about sort of consultancy businesses falling under the law, but then it was clarified it wasn't. Can we put clarity on whether some of these consultancy activities fall under AML, or is it more to do with corporate service providers, which is a bit of a different sort of activity?
So, Lorenzo, to answer that, we've had some cases as well, similar cases, where management consultancies were actually fined, but when we approached and appealed against those, the authorities, asked about further details and then cleared these up if they weren't actually engaged in the particular activities that are mentioned under the law. So, yeah, there was some uncertainty from the licensing bodies, but it can be, appealed and then taken advantage of in that essence.
Very good, very good. All right. Do we have any more questions from the audience? I'm giving another couple of seconds to see. There is a long question from Benny here. I'm going to struggle to read all of this, but I can see that there is something that relates to having set up a company in 2019 and opening a bank account, but you haven't really operated this business. The question is, what is the proper process on setup for us to do such cases, tax and accounting perspective? I think we're going to have to take this offline, Veni. I'll get one of the guys to connect with you separately. Maybe take the email address of Zeeshan, drop him a line, and we can look into your case a little bit more in detail, because it seems to be quite a bit of a specific situation that we're addressing. Any more questions on the issue of AML before we move on to other topics? Or from you guys, from the panelists, Mohamed or Zeeshan or Hannah, any final comments on this?
Just one thing I would like to add is on the World Check front, you mentioned that is it required? It's World Check is not required from authorities' point of view, but it is recommended, because otherwise you would have to do it manually. You would have to get the Excel lists from the authorities and check them one by one. So World Check is basically a software that's usable to make that easier for you. It does an overall check throughout the internationally, whether someone has had a case in a different part of the world, something like that. So it helps you screen. It's just one of the softwares available. There are other softwares as well, LexisNexis, Equity, plus a whole lot more. So clients can choose whichever software they want to use, or they can use a manual approach to check one by one. It's just something that they have to do. Like Hannah said, it's something that they need to do, whether they choose to do it manually or automatically. It's something of ease, basically.
Very good. Sergey is asking, is it the same through the different emirates? This is a federal law, correct?
Yes, this is a federal law. So it's being managed by the federal authorities. There are different supervisory bodies involved, and it goes up to the executive council.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, I think we covered well. Thank you, Hannah, for your comments on this. And maybe, Hannah, if you could include your email address also there on the chat, so that anybody that has any further questions on AML, they can reach out to you and ask you further advice and perhaps some support if they are to fall under one of the activities. Mohamed,
Sure.
we are on with you. You are our tax superhero and advisor, and I know very few people in the UAE that know as much as you when it comes to tax related matters. But maybe as a quick introduction, tax was firstly introduced in 2008, where VAT was introduced of 5%. The big question would be, is there going to be an introduction of corporate tax in the UAE? We're going to leave that towards the end of today's session. I'm sure that's a big question that many people would like to know. But tell us about VAT to begin with, and then we will discuss whether there will be some possible corporate tax introduced in the UAE. Tell us about VAT 2018 and what has been some of the changes. How do we keep up with making sure that we're sending the right reporting? What is the threshold that we should be looking into? I just, my wife just called me over the phone and said that the bank just called her and is realizing that she has passed a certain amount of invoicing and that she needs to make sure that she is, linked up to the tax system. Tell us a little bit more about this.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo, for the introduction. I would start with a brief introduction for the new businesses about who's required to register for VAT and who's required to comply with the VAT regulations. So when it comes to the VAT registration, there are two ways to register for the VAT. The first one is the mandatory registration. This is applicable to the businesses who exceeded the amount of 375,000 over the last 12 months, or they expect to exceed this amount in the next 30 days. For example, you have a contract or a purchase order that was signed that confirms that you will exceed this amount in the next 30 days, then it will attract for you the need to register for the VAT within 30 days from exceeding the threshold. The other way around this is to do it the voluntary registration, which is applicable once you exceed the minimum amount of 187,500. When we talk about the threshold, we do include only the taxable supplies and imports. So if you are doing business inside the UAE that is taxable at 5%, then this will be included within the threshold. One very important note that is always causing confusion to many clients, the export of goods or services. It is taxable at 0%, but this means that it's taxable and it attracts the needs to register for VAT. So you need to include it within the threshold when you look at your threshold. I have came across many cases that clients, they are invoicing outside and they suppose that they don't need to register for VAT because they are dealing internationally. But actually, this is not the case. Invoicing outside, yes, it can be taxable at 0%, but still it needs to register for VAT because of these invoices. So once you register for the VAT, the tax authority will allocate quarterly VAT returns. So for example, it can be from Jan to March. And after the end of the quarter, you will have 28 days to submit the VAT return to report the amount of your sales, your expenses, and all those details. And it is very important to make sure that you register on time because the late registration always attracts penalties, and the penalties start from 10,000. Plus, it causes a lot of complications that because you would be required to pay VAT effectively since the effective date of registration, which is the date after which you have exceeded the threshold. So the most important to start the compliance with the VAT registration, then you would be able to maintain your accounting and you will need to do the quarterly VAT returns. And I will be also talking today about the major updates during the last quarter from the Federal Tax Authority, as there have been some changes and some updates from the tax authority in terms of the regulations. There have been updates in the Federal Tax Procedure Law. In this, that is related to the appeals and reconsiderations. So previously, if there was a penalty, the business has the right to appeal against the decision that was issued by the Federal Tax Authority. And this was only available for 20 working days. So the deadline was 20 working days to submit any appeal or any reconsideration to a decision issued by the tax authority. The recent update of the law came into effect from November, and this gives the right to submit the appeal and the reconsideration within 40 working days. Previously, the tax authority was supposed to reply to you within 20 working days, but now it has changed to 40 working days. And there is a very good update, and it's very important to business. Previously, you were not able to proceed to the tax dispute resolution committee before paying off all the penalties. So according to the regulations, The first step for appeal is to submit a reconsideration to the tax authority itself to request to reconsider the decision. And if it's not, if you are not satisfied with the decision of the reconsideration, you can proceed to the Tax Dispute Resolution Committee. So before, you were required to pay and clear all the outstanding penalties before going to the Tax Dispute Committee. But now, after the change, it has become acceptable to proceed to the Tax Dispute Committee without paying the penalties, which is very helpful for businesses that are facing penalties.
All right, there was a good point that you raised, and I think this is something it reminded me, and I think many people in the group of attendees, I think it applies to many of them, especially knowing that many of them are running these international businesses. This issue of owning a company in the UAE, where let's say most of your invoices and clients are internationally, I think many people are under the impression, or they know that you don't need to charge tax or 5% tax is not applicable for those invoices and for these clients that you're invoicing outside of the UAE. Yet again, you still need to register for VAT.
Yes, correct. So if you are invoicing, providing, for example, consultancy to client outside the UAE through your business in the UAE. So I came across many cases the client has the opinion that this is not considered as taxable as I'm dealing with an international client outside the UAE. But as per the regulation, you are required to be accountable for this, and you will be required to register for VAT. Even though it's not taxable at 5%, it's taxable at 0%, but still this attracts the needs to register for VAT. So from here, you need to start to register for VAT and be compliant with the regulation. But if you will not proceed with the registration, then it will cause a lot of issues and penalties. And the other option for businesses that are dealing 100% with international clients, I came across cases, client is dealing only 100% with clients outside the UAE. Then there is an option called exception, that you submit application to the tax authority, request from them to give you exception from the VAT registration. With this, you wouldn't be required to submit VAT returns quarterly or do anything further.
And I can see many comments. Lutz is asking, we have Anahita asking, doesn't seem to be a lot of clarity on this topic. Anahita is saying, this is not for free zone companies, right? Well, no, yeah, it is. Lutz is saying, do we understand as a free zone company not operating in the UAE, but only outside, we're still not subject to UAE VAT? Yes, you are. You're not having to charge VAT, but you still need to be registered, and you need to submit your reporting showing that these invoices have been, are charged as zero tax. Correct, Mohamed?
Yes, correct. You need to either apply for the registration or apply for the exception if it will be applicable for you.
Correct. So Anahita, Lutz, or anybody else that needs clarity on this, please reach out to Mohamed and make sure that your company is registered for VAT, regardless whether you are charging these clients for VAT or not. This is something that I have also learned in the last one year or so. And obviously we can see that a lot of clients don't have the full clarity on it. What else we can talk about VAT, Mohamed? I think you have another couple of points prepared for today.
Yes, I would like to give a heads up for the clients that have any outstanding penalties. In June, the tax authority issued a decision for redetermination of the administrative penalties that were applied before 28th of June. So there is a golden chance to businesses now to benefit from a reduction of 70% to the outstanding penalties that were applied before 28th of June. So what the businesses needs to do to benefit from this, they need to clear out any outstanding VAT amounts payable to the tax authority. And the second step, to pay 30% of the penalties that were applied before 28th of June. And if these conditions are met, the tax authority by 31st of December will remove the 70% of the penalties, and it will not be an obligation anymore. So
very good.
This is a golden chance for all the businesses that have penalties to benefit from this before 31st of December.
Sergey is asking, what is the penalty for not being registered for VAT for companies with international invoices only?
All right, so the penalties start from 10K for the late VAT registration penalty, and it depends on how long you are late. So suppose you are required to register from 2018, then you would be accountable for the VAT returns from 2018. So they would apply also VAT late return filing penalties. So it depends from one case to the other on which date you were required to register.
Ursula is asking if the threshold of 375,000 dirhams still applies in the case that you're just invoicing internationally. So let's say that you've invoiced internationally below 375,000 dirhams. Do you still need to register for VAT?
If you invoice below 375,000, then it's not mandatory to register. But what we do recommend to our clients is that if you are about to exceed the threshold and you're expecting that in a couple of months you will exceed the threshold, I would recommend to proceed with a voluntary registration in order to avoid deadlines and to avoid any delays that might cause penalties. And also the registration takes up to 20 working days from the tax authority to review it.
What happens if in year one you pass the threshold and you applied for and you registered for VAT, but the second or third year you are not passing this threshold and you are reporting a threshold below 375? Are you still having to pay taxes for those amounts below 375?
A very good question. As long as you are registered for the VAT, you would be required to charge 5%. However, once your amount of sales falls below 187,500, here it comes the need to deregister from VAT, which is mandatory. Also, the late deregistration can cause penalties. But if you are in between of 187,500 and 375, then it's optional for you. If you would like to continue to be registered, then you can stay registered. If you would like to deregister, then you have the option to submit deregistration application. However, for some businesses, they see that it's a benefit for them to be registered so they can claim back the VAT that they pay on their expenses. So you need to assess your business if the compliance and burden to submit the VAT returns is higher, or the benefit that you are getting from claiming back the VAT is higher.
Another key question that comes up when we discuss these topics, Mohamed, is the issue of bookkeeping. Now, let's go through this again. Which type of companies, whether in a free zone or in the mainland, or type of free zone, do require, or the authorities do require companies to be bookkeeping?
As per the tax regulations, all the businesses in the UAE, whether in a free zone or a mainland, whether you are registered for VAT or not, you are required to maintain your accounting records. The reason why the tax authority requires the accounting record, for example, you are not registered for VAT and they would like to make an audit for you and to check why you are not registered, then they would expect from you to have proper accounting records, confirms and proves that you are not required to register. So it's applicable to any business, whether registered or not.
Very good. Excellent, Mohamed. So if you could put your email there on the chat function, I'm sure that there's a lot of questions. But you know, the issue of tax, like all the other two issues that we discussed so far, AML and ESR, is one of those things that when you own a business in the UAE or anywhere in the world, you want to make sure that you have a good friend, like in the case of Mohamed, that could keep you updated and constantly be checking. So any of you that have questions or that need a bit more support, please reach out to Mohamed on the issue of tax, and we'll make sure that we try to reply and assist you with the right information. Zeeshan, I understand that we have a last point to discuss for today, and that's the issue of UBO, ultimate beneficial ownership. Can you tell us about UBO and what have been some of the latest changes on this?
Sure, absolutely. Just to quickly mention about UBO, UBO is the ultimate beneficiary owner that needs to be identified for every company. This law applies to everyone within UAE. And now the licensing bodies, what they're doing is at the time of setups, they require this information to be submitted along with their applications. But that's just one element that needs to be taken, into consideration. After that, what you need to do is maintain a register of your shareholders, partners, and maintain a separate register of your ultimate beneficiary owners, because sometimes it happens that the UBO or the beneficiary owner is different from shareholders when there are multiple layer of companies involved. But yeah, these registers need to be maintained separately on an ongoing basis, and whenever there are changes, these need to be reported to the authorities, and they will obviously ask for these when the companies are renewing their licenses. So this is also very, very important to make sure, because even if you do not do one of the amendments, one of the changes, it could possibly open up you to a penalty of 15,000. So it's a very small law. It's a very, very small thing to keep track of. It just needs to be done in a way that it has to be done. So this is something that applies to all regulations that come into place. And I always say to make sure you do your assessments regarding any regulations that come into place, whether it's ESR, whether it's AML, whether it's VAT, whether it's UBO. Always assess yourself, find out the recommended actions regarding that, whatever you need to do, whatever you need to maintain, and then take those actions and maintain or make sure you're complying to these regulations.
Excellent. And once you've submitted your UBO, let's say from last year, do you need to submit again a new report for UBO the following year? Is it only in the case that there have been changes to their shareholder structure or to potentially to the ultimate beneficiary?
So most of the licensing bodies require this to be submitted on an annual basis just to confirm. But when you have changes, you need to make sure that these are submitted within the 15 days of these changes happening.
Excellent. Very good. All right. Well, I think we're reaching the end of today's session. It's 3 minutes to 4. I want to start maybe rounding things up, maybe to see if there are any final questions from the audience. Dominic is saying, great session. Lorenzo and team, thank you so much for the update. An excellent session. It's our pleasure to stay in touch with our clients and the people that we have helped in setting up businesses and help them throughout their journey. As we say in our business motto is, because business setup is just the beginning. We know that after you getting your license, there's so many more areas that you will need support. Maybe for you guys, Hannah, Mohamed, any final thoughts, anything that you would like to mention for closing?
Just from my side, like you mentioned, we're always happy to help. So feel free to get in touch with our team. If you have any questions, even if there's any questions that are not relating to the topics that we discussed today, please get in touch with us. And yeah, we'd be happy to help and give you an assessment of how your business is looking.
Excellent. Mohamed, final thoughts?
I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. And whenever you need any help in tax compliance or anything, our team would be more than happy to help you. And I would recommend you to start looking at VAT health check to make sure that you are compliant with the regulations.
Excellent. Maybe everybody's asking to put your emails one final time. Maybe write your emails there. Mohamed, you just wrote yours. Hannah, please put your email one more time there so people can copy and paste before we close this. Zeeshan is there. So to the audience, please feel free to reach out to them. Awesome session. It'll be great to have a summary maybe We will send you a link to this whole session. And we have a new guide that we're launching in the weeks to come that covers all these topics on a written format. So since you are part of our database now of attending our webinars, we'll make sure that we'll be sending you these guides and keeping you up to date with all the relevant information related to the topics shared today. Hannah's email is there. Zeeshan, your closure for today.
So regarding any law that comes into place, whether new, whether old, my recommendation to everyone is first assess yourself. Whether it be ESR, whether it be VAT, whether it be AML, UBO, assess yourself whether you fall under the law. If you do, check what the recommended actions are, what you need to do, and then actually do them to maintain, compliance, and make sure you continue that compliance as and when you need. But yeah, always be sure to assess yourself first, because that's the first step towards staying compliant, knowing what needs to happen. If you don't know, if you don't engage, that will only cause issues. So get in touch with someone. And what we have done as Careers on Tax and Accounting, we have come up with a package that gives you a whole holistic approach on all these compliance areas and can help you a long way in assessing everything regarding AML, UBO, ESR, bookkeeping, anything. So if you need any help on that, reach out to us and we'd be happy to help you in any way.
Excellent. Very good, Zeeshan. Thank you so much for that. Guys, thank you for today. Zeeshan, Hannah, and Mohamed, thank you for your time. I see people saying more sessions like this, please. It's our pleasure. We try and do as much as we can, although we're also quite busy in dealing with day-to-day activities, but we're trying to give you as much information as we can on a monthly basis and update you. I think we're doing these sessions once a month at least. Thank you to all the attendees. Thank you for everybody that connected. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.